Cool. Let me get my words back up. All right, so this is another coronavirus episode of Halfway Podcast. This one is one that Mark did. Yay, and Cody's not here as per usual.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say it's not completely his fault this time around.
He may not have been invited, but what have you. And since no one can still, especially me because I got the coronavirus, nobody can get haircuts or anything. I'm wearing a hat today, which is unusual, but it just is. My hair doesn't get long and luxurious. It just gets big and thick. So
Mine used to get long and luxurious, but now I don't have enough on my head to make it worth it.
Are you just going to someday get rid of all of it and just go like Chad?
I don't know what I'm going to do. It depends on if I keep balding or if it just like stops, you know? If it stops at this, I'll probably just keep my hair short. But if it keeps going, I don't know, maybe I'll glue a wig to my head or something that's like black, so I have like red on the side and black on top.
Yeah, that would be real cool and good.
Yeah.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about one of Jay's favorite people in history. On October 26th, 1440, Joan of Arc's friend, knight, and lord Gilles de Rais was hanged and then thrown into a fire.
He was like her main like general too, wasn't he?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So super popular thing to do in Europe at the time. We know that this happened to millions of women accused of witchcraft, but Gilles had more insidious crimes than that. Kidnapping, raping, and killing kids.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Gilles de Rais. Sources disagree, but some people believe Gilles de Rais was born around September 4th, 1404 to all of this is French. So Guy Ile de Montmorency Laval and Marie d'Acron in their family castle. Those people don't matter. He seemed like a bright kid at the time. He spoke fluent Latin, could actually read, which was, except for nobility and church people, unheard of in the Middle Ages, and was interested in being in the military like you do in 15th century France. His father was descended from the first barons of France, the Montmorencys. His mom was a direct descendant of King Robert II. That's only interesting because history's credited him with restoring the imperial Roman idea of burning heretics at the stake, which we'll find some irony with later on.
Yeah, fun.
No expense was spared in prepping Gilles to take over the family, quote, business of being a rich person. His clothes were miniature versions of what his dad wore, but he only saw his parents occasionally, good or bad, depending on the parents. Like other noble heirs, since so much rested on him, fortune, lands, titles, the livelihoods of everybody who took care of him, he was treated like a little king. When he turned 7, his formal education began, and Gilles' father hired the finest tutors to cultivate his son and heir's mind. September 28th, 1415, though, Gilles' father is killed in a gruesome hunting accident that Gilles may have witnessed, actually, which is awful and gross for a little kid to deal with.
Yeah.
And then it's unclear what happened to Mom. Either Mom died, not known, or she remarried and disappeared from her son's lives because Gilles had a brother too. History we'll find during the Dark Ages is particularly unclear at times. So around this time, Mom is just not there. Nobody knows if she died or she married somebody else and abandoned the children. So
just lost in history, huh?
Yeah. So the world will never know. Gilles and his brother went to live with Grandpa on Mom's side, Jean de Cron. Grandpa Jean, yeah?
If I had to guess, the mom was probably remarried and the kids were coming to age, so they wanted to send them to the next father figure.
Yeah.
And outside of that, the mom disappeared into obscurity because no one gave a fuck about her because it's the 1400s.
Yeah, women were still property, literally, legally property. Yep. So they go to live with Grandpa Jean. Grandpa Jean seems to have just had no rules at all, it's apparently. Gilles described him later on as overly indulgent, letting the brothers get away with outrageous behavior. He didn't describe what it was, but just Grandpa let us do whatever we want. So Gilles got used to getting what he wanted when he wanted it, leading to impatience with delayed gratification and a lack of regard for others. So the usual for rich people, even now. Grandpa Jean tirelessly schemed, for his part, to get Gilles even more money and prestige, which is cool. On October 25th, 1415, Gilles still kind of a kid, Grandpa Jean's only son, Amaury, was killed at the Battle of Agincourt, a disastrous French defeat. So now Gilles stood to inherit the vast Craon wealth too. So he's going to get stuff from his dad's side and mom's side. He's the only guy, the oldest guy left.
Oh, hell yeah. Good for him, I guess, at this point.
At this point. It turns out well, sort of, at some points later on. In 1416, Grandpa Jean arranged a future match between Gilles, who's now 12, and 4-year-old Joan Paynel, one of the richest heiresses in Normandy. They were betrothed in 1417 when she's 5 and he's 13. But that plan fell through when Joan got sick and died. So that one didn't work out.
I mean, 1400s.
As you do.
Odds of that happening were high.
Yeah. Grandpa found somebody else. That's okay. Beatrice de Rohan, niece of the Duke of Brittany. I don't really know all of the, I can tell you what I read were all of these people's titles. That doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not French, nor am I from the Middle Ages, so I don't know the hierarchy. He's not the king of France, but he's the Duke of Brittany. Don't know what that means.
Yeah. And basically like the person in charge of the area. Kind of like how
the mayor of
cities will have mayors.
Yeah.
But better than that because mayors actually don't do shit.
And don't get that much money probably. And aren't beholden to the king, like a duke would be. So Beatrice de Rohan, though, she died too. So as will happen. Child mortality, of course, was high in medieval France. Any mortality was high in medieval France.
Yes, and you know what? I'm glad you brought that up because when people this shit pisses me off so much, okay? When people say that the average age was 35 and then they envision this 35-year-old being 70. No. If someone lived into their teens and 20s and 30s, if something like war or famine didn't kill them, they lived well into their 70s. It was common. It wasn't rare. It's just the average age was so skewed because kids died by you gotta have like 20 kids for one of them to live.
That's why you gotta have so many. You don't have to do that now. The Catholics can calm down. You don't need to have 20 kids. They're probably all gonna live.
Yeah.
So these two deaths helped form the basis of the claim. I wrote a little bit. I don't know that we'll ever do this fully because there's not a whole lot there. But this helped form the basis of the claim that Gilles de Rais was the original Bluebeard from French folktale. That story is about a depraved and violent nobleman who murders one wife after another, but it's basically where the similarity ends to the actual death Gilles caused. He didn't kill his wives.
I've heard like 10 people called the original Bluebeard, so
yeah.
Who knows who,
If there was death involved, maybe the original Bluebeard. No.
Yeah.
Probably not. Grandpa Jean gave up briefly, finding a wife for his grandchild. By 1420, the war was on the horizon in France yet again, and Gilles was given a different chance to honor the family name. Not marriage, but maybe die in battle or just become very successful at waging war. The Breton War of Succession went from 1341 to 1364. It was the struggle between the Montforts of Brittany and the Counts of Blois for control of the Duchy of Brittany. Doesn't really matter to Americans. It matters to the French, I'm sure. This was a bloody thing. Charles of Blois overran the city of Quimper in May 1344. The only important thing about this is an estimated 2,000 civilians were massacred in that battle. In quotes.
And for people that want to know which war they're talking about, you can basically, there's going to be a lot of information, but it's called the Hundreds-Year War.
Yeah.
So it's a war between England and French from 1337 to 1453.
Yeah, it just goes on and on. They're fighting back and forth. Who's in charge of this land, as you do in the Dark Ages.
Yep.
Breton and Norman prisoners were sent to Paris, where they were executed for treason. The Montforts in this little skirmish were victorious, diplomatic treaty is signed, but the Blois kept plotting their comeback. We're going to get these fuckers back. So that brings us to 1420, 60 years later. Oliver de Blois, Count of Penthièvre, reopened the conflict by kidnapping Jean V, the ruling Duke of Brittany. So that's not great. Grandpa Jean, a different Jean, and 16-year-old Gilles took the side of the Montforts and the kidnapped Duke. So they take sides. They're taking the side of the guy who gets kidnapped. De Blois sent thugs to rain terror in exchange to the Craon and de Rais territories. Gilles fought back with a fierceness de Blois couldn't have foreseen because it's a 16-year-old kid. Gilles killed some of the thugs and sent others running, and he and Grandpa Jean secured the release of the Duke of Brittany. That's pretty good for them.
Yeah.
Probably an old guy and a 16-year-old. The grateful Duke of Brittany gave them money and lands, which is, again, a pretty good deal for being victorious and getting a kidnapped victim back.
Yeah.
So after this, Grandpa Jean gets back on his bullshit to find Gilles a wealthy wife. This time, though, they're successful. They find Catherine de Thouars, heiress of some other French rich people. Later, a fun fact about Catherine's family. Later, Catherine's parents claimed Gilles abducted their daughter and forced her to marry him, which is unlikely since she stayed with him willingly afterward and supported schemes against her own family later on. So people are making all kinds of bullshit up at this point in history.
Yeah,
in France.
It could also be that, like, initially, we know how young
Stockholm
people are, maybe
syndrome.
she lied a little bit at the start
Yeah.
about their relationship, to her family, so.
Either way, Gilles and Grandpa Jean greedily took possession of Catherine's lands and her parents' fortresses, the ones that they could get. That same year, Grandpa Jean, who had a wife, has not been mentioned until now. His wife died, and he married Catherine's widowed grandmother.
Oh, okay.
So Grandpa Jean and Grandma Anne were the grandparents of the newlyweds, which is more interesting rich people incest shit.
Yeah, accurate. Sounds right. 1400s.
So, when Gilles turns 21, 1425, year doesn't that much matter. He starts to study with the Dauphin, the future King Charles VII of France, learning the ropes of being at royal court. He's not been at court, and he's been a kid, and he's been in some battle. He's apparently good looking, so his good looks and the ability to assume courtly manners when it suited him earned the future king's favor. So good job for Gilles here.
Yeah.
So he does such a good job, and the future king likes him so much that he serves as commander in the royal army from 1427 to 1435. Full 8 years of military distinguishment. He did distinguish himself by being particularly brave on the battlefield when the on-again, off-again 100 Years' War springs back to life. And so, again, this is the thing where England and France are fighting over who should rule both countries, basically, in a nutshell. There's a lot more there, and it's too boring for this time. But another time. No, it's 100 years. How could you cover an entire 100 years other than saying they were fighting for 100 years?
I'm sure there's whole podcasts about the 100-Year War, so.
Who's that guy who did like the super cool, really long one on World War I and World War II? That guy probably did it.
I know who you're talking about, but I don't know his name.
I can't think of it. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to boost his podcast on this one. He doesn't need it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, he doesn't. And he would probably think they were like, who are these amateurs talking about history? They're so fucking dumb.
He's going to leave us an iTunes review. Maybe it would be 5 stars. Gilles and Catherine's only child, Marie, is born in 1429. After that, the couple's rarely ever together again. So that's the thing you can do. Have one kid and then don't ever see your wife or kid again. In 1429, Gilles at court when a 17-year-old peasant girl named Joan from Domremy demanded to see the Dauphin. She says she's been sent by God to defeat the English who were laying siege to Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
The Dauphin thought that she was insane, but was willing to try anything once, apparently. He told Gilles to accompany this kid to face the English at Orleans. Gilles was into boys at this point, and since Joan looked boyish, he was totally into it, apparently. Joan d'Arc was born in 1412 to a farmer Jacques d'Arc and his wife Isabel. In 1415, when she was 3 years old, King Henry V of England invaded northern France, shattered the French forces, and won the support of the Burgundians. In 1420, 8 years later, Henry V signed a treaty that allowed him to take the French throne as regent for the insane French King Charles VI. This arrangement was supposed to be that the English king would inherit the throne when Charles died, but both kings ended up dying in 1422 and leaving Henry's infant son as king of both countries, Charles III, the Dauphin. Around this time, Joan started having mystical visions of St. Michael and St. Catherine, proclaiming her as the savior of France and urging her to go meet with Dauphin Charles. In May 1428, she cuts her hair, puts on men's clothes, and travels to where the Dauphin is holding court, where the doubtful but desperate Charles sends her to Orleans to face off with the English. Gilles was with Joan during the battles that raged between May 4th and 7th, 1429, when the French troops seized control of English fortifications. Joan was wounded, but recovered quickly enough to go to the front lines and lead a final assault. But by mid-June, the English were on the run, and the French were celebrating the thought of being an autonomous country again. There's really, I can't remember, it was a long time ago. I saw a pretty decent movie about Joan of Arc, though. There's been a couple made. I mean, more than a couple movies, but a couple good ones that I've seen made. After this victory, the Dauphin Charles was crowned Charles VII, King of France, on July 18th, 1429. Joan was with him in a prominent place at the ceremonies, and so was Gilles. King Charles made Gilles a Marshal of France, which is a big military deal for him. He gets fancy special awards that usually go to entire communities instead of just a single person and whatnot, nonsense like that. He's doing pretty good at this point. But then we fast forward a little bit to spring of 1430. Months after an attempt to take Paris from the enemy, Joan went to Compiègne in northern France to confront the Burgundians. She's not done fighting. Gilles wasn't there for this campaign, and Joan was thrown from her horse during the battle and captured by the Burgundians. Several months later, she's delivered to the English and imprisoned at Rouen, the main English stronghold in France. King Charles made no attempt to secure Joan's release. Allegedly, he threatened to exact vengeance against Burgundian troops for how they had treated Joan. That's all he ever did. He made a threat. When Joan was turned over to church officials, Charles again did nothing. Joan's trial for heresy, witchcraft, and dressing like a man was initially public, but when Joan's responses outdid her accusers, they took the proceedings private, so she wouldn't rouse public sympathy and support.
Yeah.
That's a smart thing to do if you're intent on killing someone. On May 28, 1431, the tribunal found her guilty of heresy, and 2 days later, May 30th, she was brought to the marketplace in Rouen and burned at the stake in front of 10,000 people. She was 19 years old.
Oof. That's
a rough go of it.
Yeah.
So when Joan is burned at the stake, Gilles wasn't there, but at around that point, he starts to wind down his military career, and he decides to spend more time at his home estate, among the richest in Western France. The bad news about this choice is this guy is super bad with money. He's got a lot of it, but it doesn't last forever. He's super wasteful. He spends it on nonsense, and it just is all gone too quickly.
Yeah.
The very next year, Grandpa Jean dies, November 15th of 1432. Grandpa did not like how Gilles was very bad with money, and he leaves his sword and breastplate to Gilles' younger brother, which is not what you want in the Middle Ages. Gilles was the oldest, so Jipa is really saying one final fuck you to Gilles for wasting all the money. Spend it better, maybe you get some cool shit when I die. He's not going to die again, though. Next year, 1433, Gilles decides to build a chapel. He calls it the Chapel of the Holy Innocents near his castle. It was lavishly built on the scale of a great medieval cathedral, had 30 permanent staff, including chaplains, choir boys decked in expensive clothing, and solid gold ornaments. The boys' choir he, of course, selected himself. More on that later. And he decided to design robes himself and, officiate in the chapel, which he's not an officiant, but whatever.
When you got enough money, you can be, though.
You can decide that you're the priest. At the time, chapels, churches, sermons, and plays were dedicated to the Holy Innocents all over Europe. Don't really know what that is, other than There's Bible verses in Matthew 2 that say the story of the massacre of the innocents the story of the massacre of the innocents is about how King Herod oversaw the slaughter of all the male children in an effort to eliminate the king of the Jews, his rival. He kills all the babies, basically, trying to get rid of Jesus of Nazareth. He couldn't find the kid, so he killed all the kids 2 years and younger in Bethlehem and surrounding coasts.
Hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. Blanket murder.
So this is a chapel to those killed children, apparently, from 1,500 years earlier. Gilles also loves the arts, apparently, as so many soldiers do, and so he commissioned a play he called The Mystery Play of the Siege of Orleans, a drama he basically sponsored and produced. Waste of money. This seems to be based on battles he was actually part of and a hero in, and it was performed in Orleans. Which is cool, I guess.
Was he the main character as well?
He's like a reenactor, I guess, at this point.
Reenactor of his own enactment?
Yeah, when there's probably another war coming in 2 months.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I would expect that someone would spend on this play, but in today's money, it's tens of millions of dollars.
That does not seem like too much money at all for just a play.
It had a cast of 140 cast characters with 600 extras and was 20,000 lines long. He wasn't fucking around with this play.
He hired an army.
By the time the production was set to start, Gilles was basically bankrupt because of the play, largely. Gilles was never a paragon of compassion and virtue. With full support from his grandfather, he had earlier kidnapped his mother-in-law and threatened to drown her at one point. He had also beaten up a royal emissary, so Machiavellian violence was common among the nobility in the Dark Ages. Ascension and gain by breaking the backs of others was the norm. So this is the kind of man who's also building a chapel to murdered children in first century Palestine and commissioning plays to show how good he was in battle. Ascension and gain by breaking the backs of others was the norm. Squandering family money and jeopardizing status was not the norm. So having spent most all of his fortune and no longer involved with the military, instead of getting more frugal and creative, Gilles sells off his family's land so he can keep on spending. By March 1433, he had sold all of his estates in Poitou, except his wife's, and all of his property in Maine. He only retained 2 castles in Anjou, and half of the total sales of the shit was spent on the production of the goddamn play.
Nice, dude. Hell yeah.
Get that play. Go win.
You gotta live your dreams out sometimes. But you gotta make sure you keep at least 2 castles while you do it.
You do, and you have to do specifically this. The first production of the play was performed May 8th, 1435. 600 costumes were made, worn once, and thrown away, and constructed brand new for each subsequent performance.
Sure.
Unlimited supplies of food and drink were made available to people who came to see the play at Gilles' expense.
Of course.
He's got very lavish ideas of what it means to go to a play.
He's a visionary, okay? He knew what Hollywood was before Hollywood existed.
He did. It's a decent Netflix show that I just started watching.
Visionary?
Hollywood. In June 1435, Gilles' relatives are freaking out. They decide, let's keep this guy from ruining our whole entire family's name. So they try to get Pope Eugene IV to denounce Gilles' chapel, but he doesn't go for that. Whatever. Right. He's got a chapel. More chapels means more expansive power. Mm-hmm. So Gilles' brother René and cousin André reach out to King Charles, who issues a royal edict all over the place. Not only is Gilles forbidden to sell any more property, those who looked after his castles couldn't sell them on his behalf either, and no subject of the king was allowed to enter into any such sales contracts with him. He got to stop selling stuff, is what the king decides.
Yeah.
Gilles is pissed. He finds out a childhood teacher had overseen the publication of this edict, so Gilles has him kidnapped and imprisoned at Machecoul, one of his estates.
That's hardcore.
With absolutely no authority to do that.
Yeah.
But he has it done anyway. All right, cool. Sounds good.
I know this guy's like, I know where we're going with this story, obviously, but I gotta say, up to right now, he's pulling some fucking baller ass moves.
Yeah, so far he's just
I just wish the stuff in the shadows wasn't currently happening too.
Yeah. Gilles used his personal property as collateral for loans he took out at this point. He sold more holdings in Brittany, where the edict didn't apply, and the Duke of Brittany was happy to take him off his hands. Gilles' coffers at this point are still, no matter what, getting dangerously low. He figures there's one way he could solve all of his problems. Black magic.
Oh, hell yeah.
Some well-educated guys in the 1400s had an interest in alchemy, the idea that you can somehow magically turn base metals into gold. Don't know who had this idea first or why they thought that this could happen, but they did.
Yeah.
And also by doing this, you can achieve immortality. In medieval Europe, this was associated with black magic, since it often involved arcane symbols and processes, and the unwashed masses assumed it brought whoever was doing alchemy in direct contact with Satan. So by the time Gilles came around, the church had outlawed alchemy, which is something the church would definitely do. In 1448, after fucking around with after fucking around with alchemy for a while, he became obsessed. Gilles did. Gilles sent a priest and his entourage to Italy to find a genuine magician, somebody who would restore his fortune, because that's what's important to him. The priest found this clerk in minor orders, don't know what that means, but that's what he's described as, in Florence, named Francois Prelati. He was young and good-looking and charming, and Gilles was taken in, because again, so far Gilles likes boys. We don't know anything bad beyond that so far yet.
Right. That's all we know right now.
Prelati told him a few things. One, he told him Prelati was a former priest, unknown if that's true. Two, only Satan could help mortals turn base metals into gold. And three, to arouse Satan's interest and support, you got to do some bad shit in his name. Namely, kill kids, offer their hearts, eyes, and sexual organs as sacrifices.
Okay.
Satan's not paying attention for anything less than that. So
Devil's into some weird shit too, huh? He needs the sexual organs of children.
And that's exactly what Gilles did. Prelati said, okay, to be part of the conjuring, you got to sell your soul. But there, Gilles refused. Prelati claimed to have a buddy who was a demon named Baron, who he could summon to assist in spells and incantations to do the alchemy stuff. Once, Gilles and his cousin, also named Gilles for some reason, heard deafening thumps from inside the room Prelati was summoning inside of. When they looked in, they found Prelati beaten half to death. Apparently, he'd pissed off Baron somehow. Another time, Prelati rushed to tell Gilles that Baron had empowered him to conjure a pile of gold. Gilles raced to the conjuration room, but Prelati got there first and shouted, "Snake, there's a huge green snake guarding the coins." So they ran, and when they got back to the room, there was no gold, only piles of dust. Basically, Gilles was a sucker for this shit. He wanted so badly for it to be true and to work, except, of course, it never did. So Gilles got depressed and turned back to his other hobby, kids.
Right.
In the 1400s, young boys just sometimes get permanently separated from their parents. You get hired or taken as a servant or a page by a noble or the king, and you never see your family again. Now you work in the castle for the rest of your life, or if you're lucky, you get sent off to die in war. You're poor, you have no say in what happens to you, you're just a serf. Nobody cares about you or what you think. So sometimes your kids just disappear. Hopefully not all the kids in the area, but sometimes.
And back then, you're like, where'd Johnny go? I don't know, he's dead or someone kidnapped him. It is a Tuesday.
Yeah, landlords also kidnap kids to populate their own villages with young workers and residents, apparently. Tracing the abductors was next to impossible, as the kids were usually taken far from home. Only if the kid was a rich kid of noble birth did anyone actually try to find them. So some of the victims' parents of Gilles de Rais would never know what became of their kids anyway if they just went up and went missing one day. Not to mention, the 100 Years' War left many children orphaned and they circulated around begging for food and firewood. Gilles knew no one needed them or would miss them if they were gone.
Right.
It's thought that Gilles...
into some yikes.
Yeah, here comes the yikes.
Yeah.
It's thought that Gilles de Rais got busy with his murders between 1431 and 1433. The first known child to be murdered by Gilles de Rais was the 12-year-old son of a man named Jean Giudon. Sometime in 1432, the barons? No, Gilles' cousins approached a local furrier. I guess he works with hides. I don't know how to say this name. Hilaire is the last name, to whom the boy was an apprentice. So this kid is an apprentice to a guy who works with fur. The Gilles' cousins asked if they could hire the kid to take a message to the Rais castle at Machecoul. The furrier, the guy who works with fur, I hate that it's called a furrier. It's so weird. The furrier said, that's fine. You can send him to send a message, but the kid never came back. The furrier questioned the two noblemen who said, oh, I don't know, maybe he was kidnapped by child stealers at nearby castles to be made into a page, and that was that. And this seems to be the pattern. Sometimes kids were sent on an errand to Machecoul, which is where Gilles is living. Sometimes they were poor and lured with promises of food and to warm up by the fire. They entered Gilles' residence and never came back. Sometime in August 1439, the aunt of a young boy named Colin Avril was approached by one of Gilles' men, his right-hand guy named Poitou, asking if they could, quote, borrow the kid to show him the house of Archdeacon of Merle's. And they'd give the kid a loaf of bread. The aunt said, sure, I'm going to come too. But the next day the boy went to the Hotel de la Suze, where he occasionally got bread. Gilles and his entourage were staying at that hotel too, by coincidence. And then Colin never came home. Soon after that, in the same month, Gilles' partner in crime, Poitou, brought 15-year-old Bernard Le Camus, a good-looking smart kid, to Gilles' new quarters in Bourgneuf. This kid was a Breton staying in Bourgneuf to learn French. Poitou spoke to Bernard, and when the kid was asked what Poitou was saying by his aunt, another aunt, the kid said nothing, and then the kid left and was never seen again.
Yikes.
Soon, people started to notice, hey, where'd all the kids go? There's a lot of missing children, and rumors started circulating that Gilles had killed them. But it wasn't only at Machecoul, Gilles' childhood home, and where he sometimes lived, that kids were going missing. At Gilles' other residences, like Tiffauges, and places he just visited, like Orleans, many kids mysteriously disappeared too. What follows is some gruesome, awful detail about what de Rais would do. So skip ahead a couple minutes if you don't want to hear it.
I was hoping this wouldn't come up.
Gilles targeted both boys and girls, but mostly boys between 6 and 18 years old. It's a pretty big range for a serial killer. Gilles' servants would kidnap him, take him to a secluded place, and Gilles would strip them naked. He would hang them with ropes from a hook, torture, molest, and rape them. Then Gilles would either order his servants to kill them or he would kill them himself. Jean Bendetti wrote a biography of Gilles and writes this about how the children who were unlucky to be abducted were put to death. One boy was pampered and dressed in better clothes than he'd ever known. The evening began with a large meal and heavy drinking, particularly hippocras, which acted as a stimulant. The boy was then taken to an upper room to which only Gilles and his immediate circle were admitted. There he was confronted with the true nature of his situation. The shock thus produced on the boy was an initial source of pleasure for Gilles. Bad guy. Gilles killed in a number of ways, mostly with a short double-edged sword called a brocmard, which he used to slash their throats, decapitate them, or dismember them. He would often sit on their stomachs as they were dying, and after killing them, he would kiss them and mutilate their bodies to admire their limbs and organs. Then he would bury or cremate their bodies. Gilles, so the guy who's his right-hand man is his page, Gilles' page Poitou, is an accomplice in many of these crimes. Self-described accomplice. He admitted that later on when we get to a trial. He says that he and another page, Henriette, burned the bodies in a fireplace in de Rais' bedroom. Clothes were put into the fire piece by piece, so they burned slowly, and the smell was minimized. The ashes were thrown into the cesspit, the moat, or other hiding places. 2 weeks before Christmas 1439, Jeannette Drouet sent two of her sons, 7 and 10, to Machecoul, which was one of Gilles' residences where he grew up. He happened to be staying there now, and they were never seen again. The hunt for the boys was still on when Isabeau Hamelin sent two of her boys, 7 and 15, to Machecoul to buy bread on Christmas Day. They never returned. In the new year, 1440, the kidnapping and murder continued. 2 more boys vanished and were allegedly killed at Mashakul around the new year. One was the page of a nobleman named Dossi, while the other was the nephew of a priest who'd sent him off to learn to read and write. And there are so many more stories just like those.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the Catholic Church has a tenuous history with pedophilia and just covering shit up.
Yep.
And even more so in the Dark Ages. Not only would they cover shit like this up, they might just make it up if you pissed off the wrong person. Either way, it's said to have been somewhat of an open secret that Gilles was kidnapping and killing kids. It wasn't really a problem. He wasn't arrested until 1440, some 6-7 years later, for something completely unrelated. May 15th of 1440, Gilles made a fatal error. He had sold a castle, Saint Etienne de Mermort, to Geoffrey de Ferron, treasurer to the Duke of Brittany. But he decided he needed it back, his castle. Gilles took 60 armed men and waited outside the local church where the guy currently taking care of his castle was celebrating Mass. When Mass was over, Gilles ran into the building wielding a double-sided axe. He shouted,
Jesus.
"Ha, Ribald! You beat my men and extorted from them. Come outside the church or I'll kill you on the spot." The guy agreed to surrender the castle and was marched back to it and imprisoned in the dungeon.
Nice, dude.
Unfortunately for Gilles, the key bearer, this guy he marched back to the dungeon, Jean Le Ferron, was a priest. So not only did Gilles piss off the Duke of Brittany, he pissed off the Catholic Church, and that is one thing you don't want to do.
No, you don't.
Because he tried to steal a castle from the church and kidnapped and menaced a priest, the Duke of Brittany slapped Gilles with a fine of 50,000 gold crowns, which he knows Gilles can never afford to pay. So Gilles decides to escape to Tiffauges outside of the Duke's control, one of the other places that he owns. Gilles remembered that the Duke of Brittany was the only one who would actually buy his shit if he needed to liquidate assets, so he decided to do a little apology tour and visit. Gilles just didn't know that the Duke had reported the church assault to the Bishop of Nantes and started proceedings for sacrilege and heresy.
Oof.
The Duke of Brittany's chancellor secretly published and circulated a writ of defamation in late July 1440. It details all the child kidnapping, pedophilia, and murder charges that had been circulating. The Bishop of Nantes, after the Duke of Brittany makes his complaint, started a private investigation to turn up evidence of Gilles' wrongdoing. All of his findings were based on public rumor, but for the bishop, that was enough. On July 29th, the findings are published. And after leaving the Duke's house, Gilles' entourage stopped in a town and kidnapped a 10-year-old kid named Jean Lavery. The kid was taken to a house near the market, raped, murdered, and decapitated. The body was thrown into the latrines so nobody could smell the decomposition. Gilles committed his last known murder on August 15th. Poitou told the young boy's mother that he needed a page and paid her. Poitou says the kid was killed and burned. On September 13th, without his knowledge, Gilles was indicted before the Church Tribunal of Nantes on charges of sodomy, murdering children, invoking demons, heresy, and offending divine majesty. The last one, I'm not sure what that means. Pissed off God.
I imagine it's not good.
No. On September 15th, 1440, the Duke of Brittany sent his captain of arms with 30 men to arrest Gilles at Mashakul. Gilles calmly observed the Duke's men approach from the castle walls, hears them state their mission, and allows himself to be arrested without protest, even though he had 200 men garrisoned with him at this childhood home of Mashakul. So basically, had he wanted to, he could have fought and won at least this little skirmish. But he doesn't know what the problem is, so he's fine for now, he thinks.
Like child rape and murder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is that a thing? Why is that a big deal?
He doesn't know that anyone knows about that yet.
Yeah.
Prelati, the dark magic guy, Blanchette, don't really know who that is, Poitou and Henriette, the pages, all in Gilles' entourage, are taken into custody too. 4 days later, September 19th, 1440, Gilles gets tried in both church court and regular court for a range of offenses including 49 counts of heresy, sodomy, and pedophilia, and the murder of more than 100 kids. On October 9th, my birthday, 1440, Gilles hears the charges and accusations and pleads not guilty on all charges. So for once, the Catholic Church decides pedophilia is a crime worth punishing, if you can imagine that.
I can't, but I'm listening.
Basically, in tandem, the trials start hearing testimony of parents who lost children in recent years on September 28th. There were so many of the parents, the proceedings ran until October 8th to hear them all. The judges also heard the testimonies of Henriette and Poitou, who had been tortured before telling their stories, of course. They were identified by so many of the witnesses associated with missing children, the authorities needed to apply extra pressure to get at, quote, the truth. This doesn't help the Catholic Church's side of it, torturing people to get information. Anyway, Poitou says Gilles started killing boys while his grandfather, Gilles de Rais, was still alive. The transcript of the testimonies were so gruesome the judges later ordered the worst portions to be stricken from the record. October 8th, Gilles makes an appearance before the judges. He seemed nonchalant and unconcerned until the prosecutor read the charges against him, murder and sodomy. This flew him into a rage of denial. Gilles refuses to swear an oath even though the court threatens to excommunicate him 4 times. 6 days later, October 14th, the bill of indictment is read out, 49 articles of indictment, and according to the document, Gilles had started killing children in 1426. His total victim count was 140 boys and girls. They had been, quote, shamefully tortured, and in the case of girls, he had disdained their natural vessel in favor of sodomizing them. Other crimes included invocations of demons and violating the church's immunity, kidnapping Gilles de Rais. Gilles got combative when interrogated on these 49 articles, shockingly. He calls the judges simoniacs, those who buy and sell church privileges, basically taking bribes, and ribalds, vulgar in speech or language, who had no right to judge him. I would much prefer to be hanged by a rope around my neck than to respond to such ecclesiastics and judges, he says. On the same day, Gilles is formally excommunicated and given 48 hours to reconsider his stance. Excommunication in medieval times was a big deal. It would see the excommunicated person condemned irreversibly to the pit of hell. And having thought about his fate on October 15th, after tearfully pleading for the excommunication to be lifted, Gilles took the oath declaring he was guilty of all charges against him except invoking demons. That's a ding that I shouldn't have my phone on. He figured the church cared more about this than the murders. The court still needed a confession, so they threatened Gilles with torture, as you do in 15th century France. On October 21st, the day the torture was set to start, Gilles suddenly confessed to everything. He didn't hold back on lurid detail, noting, I have told you enough to hang 10,000 men. In his confession the next day, October 22nd, Gilles said he had started murdering kids sometime in 1432 or 1433. He corroborated most of the nauseating testimony Poitou and Griert had given. Many times he looked at the parents in the audience and begged them to forgive him. They wept and declared, according to the record, that he was forgiven. He urged them to watch over their children, the ones that are still around. October 23rd, the church found Gilles guilty of heresy. The regular court found him guilty of kidnapping and torture and raising armed forces without permission. The church handed down a sentence of excommunication, but they later lifted this so he didn't have to burn in hell forever.
Right, because you only burn in hell if you're excommunicated and not if you rape, murder, and masturbate on children.
Dozens and dozens of children.
Yeah.
Also, on October 23rd, the regular court condemned Poitou and Henriette to death by hanging and burning. On October 25th, Gilles received the same sentence. Gilles asked for a favor. Don't know why he thinks he can do that. He wanted to die first so that Poitou and Henriette could see he had not gone unpunished. The church thought this was a super cool thing to do, so they said, fine, after you're burned, we'll let you get buried in the church of the monastery of Notre Dame. Wednesday, October 26, 1440, Gilles de Rais made his final confession to a friar while assistant hangmen tested the nooses and their attached chains. When everything was good to go, Gilles climbed up the wooden ladder for his execution. Apparently they're using the ladder. He paused while the hangman looped the noose tightly around his neck, and at 9 o'clock, his 2 convicted accomplices made their way to the execution place. They're just hanging out waiting to get killed. In 1440, condemned felons didn't wear hoods or blindfolds, so Gilles stared at the crowd below as he stood on the ladder. This was his final glimpse of the world. 2 hours later, after Poitou and Henriette show up, at 11 o'clock, the brush at the platform was set ablaze. Gilles either stepped off the ladder voluntarily or was pushed by the hangman. Either way, sometimes the sudden drop broke the victim's neck and caused instant death, but more often death came from slow strangulation. It's not clear which happened to Gilles, but when it was clear he was dead, his body was cut down before the flames could reach it. Henriette and Poitou weren't as lucky. They were hanged first too, but partly burned alive. Gilles' wife, after his death, Gilles' wife remarried, this time to Jean de Vendôme, who became the Duke of Brittany's Chamberlain in 1441. Catherine retained Tiffauges, Pougeage, and the other assets she brought into the marriage with her. She controlled the holdings of her daughter Marie for a bit, but Marie had so much that a high-ranking nobleman and advisor to King Charles VII took over the oversight. A lady couldn't possibly manage all of this.
Right.
King Charles arranged the marriage between the then 13-year-old Marie and the much older advisor, President de Cotivy, in the spring of 1442. The couple had no children. Marie's second husband was her father's cousin, one who had worked to keep Gilles from destroying the family name and fortune. Marie de Rais believed so strongly her father was innocent, she erected a monument at his execution site years later. It became a place of pilgrimage and remained so for 300 years until it was destroyed. Marie de Rais died on November 1st, 1457, at 37 years old. After his death, since he had been apparently contrite and composed in the face of execution, Gilles gets posthumous acclaim as a model of Christian penitence. A 3-day fast is observed after his death for who knows how many years? Hundreds of years? In one last nauseating irony, a tradition emerged for parents around Nantes. They commemorated the anniversary of de Rais' execution by whipping their children, maybe to impress on them the gravity of the sins for which de Rais had repented. And it seems like this tradition continued for over a century. Beating your kids.
Hell
to
yeah.
commemorate his death for murdering kids.
Yeah, what the fuck?
In January 1443, King Charles VII demanded an appearance before the Parliament of Paris from the new Duke of Brittany and the man in charge of the secular investigation of Gilles' crimes. He saw this as a wrongful execution of Gilles de Rais. The appearance was never made, and the king didn't press any further for some unknown reason. So there's apparently some controversy about Gilles de Rais. More modern controversy.
Really?
It's not unknown. It's widely believed that Gilles de Rais kidnapped, raped, and murdered children.
Right.
The overwhelming evidence proves it. He said he did it. His accomplices says that he did it. They did say that they all did it after they were tortured, but still, they did admit to it and gave gruesome detail that had to be removed from the record because it was too gruesome. The confessions were made under duress and torture. There's no official record of human remains being found at any of Gilles' castles at any time. Poitou had talked about bones being removed from Machecoul at one point, but there was no actual evidence found at trial. In 1992, 500 years later, Gilles' case was the subject of a retrial at the Court of Cassation, the highest court of appeals in France, and he was acquitted of all charges. But it's desperately hard to re-examine a case from the 15th century with no physical evidence and only witness testimony and confession elicited through threat of torture. But some historians say this was a nice show, a put-on attempt to rehabilitate the buddy of Joan of Arc. 2 lobbies protested the acquittal. One was the Catholic Church. The other was local residents in the vicinity where Gilles lived, vindicating Gilles posed a serious threat to their livelihood given the number of tourists who visited the ruined castles annually. Even if Gilles didn't commit the crimes himself, and as it has been argued, Poitou and Henriette actually did them, how could this have happened in his entourage without his knowledge and therefore approval? Basically, when the shit is this crazy and intense and this long ago, as one biographer wrote, his guilt or innocence will always be like beauty in the eye of the beholder. If this guy actually did kidnap, molest, and rape and kill kids, which I think that he did, based on his confession and multiple other people's confession, I hope that hell is a real place and he's burning in it forever.
Yeah, I just want to know what the point of taking a 500-year-old case, something that at this point is irrelevant in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and trying to prove the innocence of that person. That, to me, that almost feels like there's some self issues going on.
Yeah, you can't prove his innocence, and it doesn't matter to anyone at this point. Even descendants long from his line, it wouldn't matter to them because nobody's like, your great 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 grandfather Gilles de Rais, isn't it? Like that doesn't matter to anyone at this point.
No, it really doesn't. I feel like someone was trying to prove their own innocence or something. I
Yeah.
don't know. They're feeling guilty of something maybe similar.
Yeah. If it was like if there were if it were more clear that it was just the Catholic Church wanted this guy dead and rumors hadn't been circulating for a decade before, then I might be
Yeah.
more inclined to believe that he didn't do it and was just framed, but
And even if he was just framed, it just there's no way to prove it, not prove it. It's just kind
Yeah.
of irrelevant at this point.
yeah. If multiple people say that that's what you did and they did and they're going to die for it, then probably you did it.
Yeah, probably.
So that's our buddy Gilles de Rais.
Yeah. Nice dude.
He did a bad thing a lot of times and burn in hell.
I also believe that he did it just because it took the Catholic Church so long to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they only did something about it when their hand was forced.
Yeah, when he kidnapped someone that was a priest.
Yeah. All right, I'm
Idiots.
going to hit pause or stop or whatever. You know what I realized about 20 minutes in?
What's that?
I was like, man, my microphone sounds different right now. I never turned my compressor off. I turned my EQ off, but I never turned my compressor off.
Hey, that'll happen.
It's all right. It's not the end of the world.
Or is it?
Ah, fuck. I'll just... means I only have to put compressor on yours.
Render. The fun thing that happened to me, when did we record? Tuesday, and I just realized it maybe yesterday, is I never stopped recording from Help Desk Nightmares. So it
Are you
just
serious?
kept
How long did
recording
you record
overnight.
for?
It was still going until I came in here yesterday. I was like, fuck.
Oh my gosh, your computer's still alive?
Yeah. It did them in chunks so I could delete all the chunks I didn't need, but Jesus.
Yeah.
Thank you, Reaper, for not recording one long audio that I couldn't. I was just going to render out the piece that I needed and then.
I forgot to upload
that way. 5, 7.
the D&D episode. I meant to put it as a draft so it would post at a certain time, and then I just totally forgot.
Now that you figured out how to do that.
Yeah. I don't know what my deal's been this week, man. I don't know if you ever have like those weeks where your brain just goes like strictly into just obscurity and nothing. But that's how I have felt this week. I like go to do something and start it, and then like a minute later I'm doing something else. I don't know what my